welcome to our studio guests today and to fellow travelers out in cyberspace. Thanks for that non-stop stream of zeros and ones. My name is Peter Gobets, co-founder of the Zero Project and moderator of the International Conference/Workshop on Zero. The Zero Project is a three-stage affair. There's a book project, an associated online event, and the in-depth research program to follow. But today, session number 11. We welcome another contributor to the Monograph on Zero book project, Professor Esti Eisenmann, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Israel, on zero and the concept of nothingness in the medieval Hebrew tradition. Professor Jamil Aissani, University of Béjaïa, Algeria, on zero and the numeration of the Maghreb, will be rescheduled due to technical issues on his end. Professor Eisenmann will tell us, among other things, about the role that the Jewish people played in the transmission of zero to Europe from points further east. We welcome back as panelists today Dr. Marina Wil, Dr. Celeste Nzu, and Professor Jeff Oakes. Dear Esti, may we kindly invite you to briefly introduce yourself and before launching into your talk.
Okay, so I'm Esti Eisenmann. I'm a researcher of Jewish philosophy in the Middle Ages. I especially learned the contribution of Jews to sciences in the Middle Ages, and I will speak today about not just about the zero in Jewish tradition, but also about the whole concept of the not, of nothingness. So if it's okay, I'll start with my presentation.
Please.
So in my presentation today, I will deal with the concept of Nath as found in Jewish tradition in ancient days and in the Middle Ages. My survey must stop at the end of the Middle Ages, because after the expulsion from Spain in 1492, few Jews remained in Europe who could be exposed to the new sciences and to the new ideas about the Nath. Only after the emancipation in the 18th century were some Jews exposed to these new ideas, but even then their discussion on Nath did not have a particular Jewish nature. The first part of my presentation looks at the philosophical aspect of the Nath from two perspectives: Exnihilo Creation and the vacuum in the created material world. The second part of my talk addresses the Hebrew system of symbols for numbers, from the Bible until the Jews' adoption of the Arabic numerals. So I begin with Exnihilo Creation. Most biblical scholars do not think that Genesis 1:1 postulates ex nihilo creation or any other verse in the Bible. Philo of Alexandria is in the first half of the first century maintained that God created the Logos from his mind, after which he created the helic matter. The church fathers, perhaps influenced by Philo, tended to the idea of ex nihilo creation. But the sages in Palestine and in Babylonia in late antiquity, who shaped the concept of the mainstream of rabbinic Judaism, were not familiar with Philo's work. In general, they did not permit discussion of creation at all. However, it is evident that some of them accepted the idea that God had created the universe from pre-existing matter, and some of them rejected it. In contrast to the ambiguity about creation in the Jewish tradition of antiquity, Saadia Gaon in the 10th century, who was the head of one of the major Jewish academies, took an explicit stand in favor of ex nihilo creation and came out against the idea that the universe as a whole was not created from absolute nothingness. Even though not all Jewish philosophers of the Middle Ages agreed with Saadia. Jewish tradition held to the idea that biblical position binding on every Jew is that of total and absolute ex nihilo creation. This Jewish philosopher, who like Saadia before read Greek philosophy in Arabic translations, knew Parmenides' idea that whatever is, and what is not, cannot be, and consequently rejected the idea that something was created from nothing. But they did not state their opinion openly in order not to be accused of heresy. So Jewish tradition, at least openly, accepted the notion of the not, in contrast to Greek philosophy. But the motivation for this acceptance was mostly theological and came in order to emphasize God's omnipotence. The existence of vacuum in the post-created world. The topic of void is absent from the ancient Jewish texts of the Bible and late antiquity and comes up only in the Middle Ages when Jews were exposed to Greek philosophy and had to grapple with the relationship between Greek science and Jewish tradition. Overall, we can say that Jewish philosophers in the Middle Ages rejected outright the concept of vacuum and employed proofs adduced by Aristotle in Physics 4 to demonstrate its impossibility. Sachdev Kreskas in the 14th century was the first medieval Jewish philosopher who demurred from this consensus, denying many of the basic postulates of Aristotelian physics. Kreskas explained that vacuum was essential for defining place and asserted that place is the empty space in which bodies are located. For him, space is quite independent of physical objects. He defined it as infinite. As Zev Harvey has shown, his acceptance of the vacuum was influenced by the idea of Nicole Rossem, who lived also in the 14th century. Spinoza, in the 14th century, had read Kreskas' book and was influenced by him, but Kreskas had virtually no influence on the major stream of Jewish philosophical tradition of the Middle Ages. Now I come to the mathematical not, zero, in Jewish tradition. The biblical system of numeration is decimal, but based on the numbers from 1 to 10 and has no zero. The fact that the biblical term for 11 is 11, 110, supports the idea that the first in the series of numbers is 1 and the last is 10. The next set of 10 being with 1 plus 10. The word 100 has no etymological connection with either 1 or 10. In any case, the Bible has no concept of numerals. Numbers are indicated only in words. The sages of the Mishnah and Talmud in late antiquity, who had exposed to Greek culture, adopted the Greek system of denoting numbers but by means of letters. In this system, the first 10 letters of the Hebrew alphabet represented the numbers 1 through 10, and the next 8 letters represented the 8 decades from 20 through 90. Because the Hebrew alphabet has only 22 letters, 400 was the maximum value that could be indicated this way. If they wanted to write a large number, they were liable to need a very long string of letters. The concept of numerals, including the zero, was unknown to the Talmudic rabbis. Consequently, we may assume that in antiquity, Jews generally employed an abacus to calculate, like the societies around them. But because in ancient times, Jews were not interested in pure mathematics, they had to calculate only in dealing with practical matters, such as the astronomical calculation required to determine the Hebrew calendar, or various geometrical problems. Sefer Yetzirah, an extremely enigmatic work written in Hebrew, which scholars date to between the 1st and the 7th centuries, begins by setting the number 10 as superior to all other numbers. It asserts that the universe was created by the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, as well as by 10 units. So the number 10 has cosmogonic and cosmological significance. For people today, the idea that the decimal system is based on only 10 units, but is infinite, may seem a trivial matter. For the author of Sefer Yetzirah, for whom letters do not have a symbolic function from which the decimal system can be derived, the idea that counting by 10 units is infinite led to joy and astonishment. However, in Sefer Yetzirah, as in the Bible, the decimal system runs from 1 to 10 and there is no 0. Even though the Indo-Arabic numerals were known in the Muslim world in the early Middle Ages, in the 9th century, another 3 centuries passed before the system was adopted by the Jews. Consequently, Jewish philosophers who had been introduced to Greek sciences and were extremely interested in mathematics required verbal presentation of extremely complex mathematical problems and their solutions, which naturally made it harder to understand them. The Book of the Number by Abraham ibn Ezra in the 12th century was the first work written in Latin Europe that offered a detailed explanation of the use of Arabic numerals. Ibn Ezra treatises, which have been written in Italy, anticipated Leonardo Fibonacci, by a century. It is a full and systematic treatment of arithmetic. In his introduction, Ibn Ezra explains that the system he presents is of Indian origin and that he will adapt it in Jewish version. In this book, he writes, the wise men of India denoted all their numbers by 9 and devised shapes for the 9 digits. I wrote instead of them the first 9 Hebrew letters, but 9 is the end of every counting. Ibn Ezra also associated the number 9 with the number of the orbs posited by the astronomy of his days. Ibn Ezra continues by introducing the sign 0, explaining that it serves as a placeholder. Because of its shape, he calls it a wheel. He also notes that its Arabic name is Zifra. Ibn Ezra does not distinguish numeral from number, which is why there are only 9 numbers, because 1 and 10 are similar. The latter is not considered to be a number. The wheel 0 is merely a placeholder and certainly not considered to be a number. Despite the idea that there are only 9 fundamental numbers, Ibn Ezra remained faithful to the concept of Sefer Yetzirah that there are 10 numbers. In his long commentary on Exodus, written about a decade after the Book of the Number, he asserts, all the numbers are 9 in one way and 10 in another way. In his commentary, he doesn't not provide a full description of the Indian numerals or mention the wheel, the 0. Had he done so, perhaps the concept of 0 would have spread among the Jewish communities at large because his Bible commentaries were extremely popular. Nevertheless, Ibn Ezra, as a mathematician, influenced educated Jews. Therefore, in subsequent generations, they referred to zero only as a tool for calculation and did not see it as a number. So now I turn to conclusions. Even though the decimal system was in common use from biblical times on, like many other cultures, the Jewish tradition did not employ zero. It was only in the 12th century that Abraham ibn Ezra adapted the zero from Arabic civilization and conveyed it into the Jewish world, whose learned circles came to use it extensively. However, zero was used exclusively as a placeholder. It was only when Jews entered the world of the secular universities in modern Europe that they began to consider zero to be a true number. But this had no impact on Jewish tradition per se. Jewish philosophy was also marked by the absence of the concept of the null. Jews who were exposed to Greek thought adopted its conclusion and rejected the possibility of the void as absurd. Indeed, one Jewish tradition that became influential mainly in the Middle Ages and modern era proposed that the material world was preceded by an absolute void. But except for this concept of ex nihilo creation, which has rejected by many Jewish thinkers, mostly implicitly, Jewish tradition tended to reject the possibility of vacuum in our post-creation world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esti. Most interesting to hear, especially since most of us would not be conversant with the primary sources, and you having delved into them to such an extent and teased out what is relevant to this particular event. Really appreciate it, taking the time and the effort. But we have on board Marina, who has some understanding of not only a lot of understanding about modern mathematics, but also of the Hebrew tradition. We'll ask Marina first to ask you any questions that she may have as a result. Marina.
But thank you very much. It was really interesting. My knowledge is just amateurish, so I'm not a professional. So it was extremely enlightening. So one thing I really liked was the idea of void. I'd never thought of connecting the zero as a zero for numbers with void, like some kind of geometric zero. That's really food for thought. I had a few questions. So one question is, so in Babylonia, we know that they had, my questions are more about the decimal system than about zero. In Babylonia, we know that they had really a decimal system, and we even have sort of multiplication tables in the Babylonian numbers. So why, like the Babylonian Talmud, where apparently scholars have found lots of Babylonian elements in medicine and other things, why is there no trace of a decimal system? Maybe the second question, it was, so from what I understand, you explained that Ibn Ezra started writing decimal numbers with Hebrew letters. Like now, some people in some Arab countries, there's still Arab numbers, decimal numbers with Arab letters instead of Arab numerals. So why? So if I understood correctly, that's very interesting. And why did this not take on? I mean, why did sort of Jewish scholars continue to write numbers in the traditional way with letters? I think that's all.
Okay, so your questions are very interesting, but I'm not sure that I know to answer everything. About the Jews who sat in Babylonia, I spoke mainly about the Jews who sat in Babylonia in the 3rd century and 4th century, much later than what you spoke about all the sciences. Okay. So Jews in the Bible do come to Babylonia about the 9th century BC, but we can't see any influence in the Bible. Of course, we saw a lot of influence, but not in the number, in the concept of zero and everything. But what I spoke mainly in my presentation was about much late, about late antiquity. So I think you can't compare the stage of sciences in that time. Concerning your second question about the numerals and the letters in Hebrew, so I can think about maybe a very interesting answer for your question. What happened in Judaism is because when Jews were exposed to the system that you count through letters, like in alphabet, Hebrew alphabet has only 22 letters, as I said in my presentation. But in a few decades, it came to the Jews that maybe you can do the other side thing. What I mean, not just that if you want to count one, you put the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but you can do also the opposite. You can go also on the opposite way. What I mean, my name is Esti. Okay, you can write Esti right in Hebrew with the first letter Aleph, and okay, and so on. And then you can say that my name Esti, if I take the value of Aleph, the first letter of my name, and you take the value of Samech and Taf and Yud, all the letters of my name. So my name has a value, a mathematics value, okay? And it's like a secret. So if you change my name, for example, it may change all the, especially in mysticism, it may change a lot of things in the cosmos. So I think that is the reason why Jews did not leave the system of counting through letters, using letters, because they saw the Hebrew as a language that is not like all languages, and the letters has cosmological meaning and cosmogenic meanings, and I think that's the reason they continued even after today, of course, every Jew uses the numbers, the numerals, but I think till today people still use also the Hebrew alphabet in order to sign numbers or numerals, because of what they see as from Sefer Yetzirah, as I said, that every name, everything has you can give it in mathematics meaning, and it has a cosmological meaning.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you very
much.
much.
I think so too. It's very interesting.
Yes, thank you both. We will now ask Celestine, who was on last week. Do you have any questions as a result of this presentation by Esti?
Thanks a lot. Esti, for your presentation. Very interesting. And I'm sorry, my research field is very far from yours, so I have learned a lot from your talk. I have a small question, because yes, I would like to know in the Jewish culture, in the history, the concept of the positive and the concept of negative and the concept of the zero, they appeared at the same time period, and they appeared in the calculation or in a certain algorithm, and so that's the relationship between the zero and the positive and negative is is my question for me.
Not as far as I know. Not as far as I know. As I said, in late antiquity, they did not have any interesting in mathematics per se. They had to calculate all kinds of things, but we don't have evidence that they knew the concept of negative. And also we don't have a lot of mathematics books before Ibn Ezra in Jewish culture. So after Ibn Ezra, most of the people did use the zero, so maybe they had the concept of negative, but before, but even though I don't know any problem in the mathematics that you can see the concept of negative.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Celeste?
No, that's all. Thanks.
I have a question for you both. Was there any contact in antiquity between the Jewish people and the Chinese people that you're aware of?
No, I think they did not have a lot of contact, as far as I know.
Was there awareness? Was there awareness that there was such a place as China?
Yes. I think at least in the 12th century, of course, we can see some books that mention China as the place that the sun rises first and all kinds of things, but not a lot from their culture. And
Celestine?
No, as far as I know, I have no such read such evidence.
No?
Sorry.
Okay. Fine. Thank you both. And then Jeff, you would have more common ground, I think, with being, specialist in the Middle East with Esti. Please, any questions?
Well, actually, first, I'd like to say something about the connection between China and, say, the Middle East. There is a story that the Arabs learned paper making from Chinese prisoners of war captured in the 8th century.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly that is the path by which paper did reach the Middle East, but that's the only connection between China and Islam that I'm aware of. So, I mean, there's of course an interaction between Islam in India and Islam in points west, but I don't know of any other contact with China besides that. I've never looked into it myself, so that's just.
How would these prisoners have been taken by?
Well, there was a battle fought in Central Asia.
In Central Asia.
Yeah, it was in Central Asia, and it was from there that they this is the story, and I've read somewhere that it's actually probably not true in detail, but that is the path by which paper arrived around the year 750.
So there would have been, say, skirmishes between Arabs and say Mongols, maybe.
They had some direct contact, although it wasn't great. But that's all I know. I know nothing beyond that.
Very interesting. Okay, this is a side light.
Yeah, that was a side. Yeah.
For your main question, sir.
Okay. What you say, Esti, about Ibn Ezra is perfectly consistent with everything I've read in medieval Arabic arithmetic, and I've read many arithmetic texts, and they present the numerals pretty much the way you described them from Ibn Ezra, which is not a surprise. In Europe, in antiquity, what they calculated mainly on an abacus, which was a table with lines drawn on it and little counters in the shape of coins that they would manipulate. And then to record the results of the calculations, they would use this alphanumeric system, very similar to the Hebrew system, where they use the letters of the Greek alphabet to represent the numbers. So the system of numeration was not used for calculation. Calculations were done on the counting board. But the purpose of the Indian numerals is for calculation itself on a dust board or some other ephemeral surface. So there's a difference there. That the use of the 9 symbols and plus the 0 is really a tool for calculation and also for writing the results of the numbers, but it's mainly a calculation tool. And in the Middle East, they use the dust board to work out all the calculations. The abacus, as far as I know, was not used in Arabic countries, in Arabic-speaking countries. They also, of course, in ancient Greece and in the Middle East, they would do finger reckoning, mental calculation in their heads, and then record numerals in this alphanumeric way. So my guess is that Ibn Ezra, when he was writing about the 9 symbols and the 0, he was talking about how to calculate with them and not necessarily just write the numbers down. So that's
yes, of course.
Yeah. And in the Arabic text, they describe the 0 almost always as a small circle and sometimes as a ring. So it's perfectly consistent that Ibn Ezra describes it as a wheel. That's common. So one thing that tells us is that it was not originally a dot as it is now in Arabic-speaking countries. The 0 is now shown as a dot, and it was not in Arabic even in the earliest text. Small circle. I can't think of anything else. I've never studied specifically the Hebrew texts themselves because I cannot read Hebrew. I've only read secondary accounts of them, but so I don't really have any other particular questions for you.
Do you want to respond to that, Esti?
No, I just want to agree with what all I heard.
Okay.
Jeff, one question from my side. I understood that when the .0 came to, because the Indians used the dot for a while, came to Babylon, it was the dot was already in use as the number 5. Is that correct? In antiquity, like in the 1st centuries BC, is that what you're talking about? That period? No. When 0 first arrived from India in 7th.
Okay, so the earliest reference I know is the Latin redaction of Al-Khwarizmi's book from the 9th century, originally written in Arabic. In that book, he describes the 0 as like the letter O. So for him too, it's a small circle, and that's the earliest I've seen.
No, because what I heard or read, again, we're also not specialists. We that's why we count on you people to do the real scholarly work. We're trying to coordinate the research and do something interdisciplinary that hasn't been done. But from what I understood is that when the .0 arrived in Baghdad, that the dot was already in use as the number 5. Is what I heard.
Okay.
And so they adapted it to a circle.
Okay, the number 5 in modern Arabic script is a small circle.
A small circle.
Yes. So the number 0 now in Arabic is the dot, and the 5 is the small circle. But in the medieval text, the 5 was not a small circle. It looked something like an angular B, or there are a couple other different shapes that were used. Sometime in the western part of the Islamic world, it looks kind of like a 5 slanted. There are many different forms that these figures took over the years and over the centuries. The 1 pretty much always remained a vertical line, like the Arabic aleph, and but starting with 2, there were many differences. 9 pretty much remained the same, but everything in between changed form.
Yeah, I think that's probably why it's referred to as the Hindu Arabic system, because it transmogrified during the travels.
Yeah, well, and not only that, in many medieval Arabic texts, the authors will show many of the different forms that are used in their own time. So individual authors acknowledged many different ways of writing the numbers themselves.
Right. Okay. This is very interesting.
It's very interesting, and it has with what I told about Avraham ibn Ezra, that he suggests to use the Hebrew alphabet from 1 to 10 and just to adapt the 0. But because, as you said, there were no one system of numerals, of the shapes.
Yes, but they knew the letters, so that would standardize it right there. So
of course.
Amazing, these twists of history. All right, we'll wind up this portion and then go to the next section with Esti, because we always conclude these sessions with a brief survey to gauge general trends. So please, Esti, reply in a single sentence to the following 3 questions, if you don't mind.
I'll try.
Was the numeral 0 discovered or invented?
By whom? By Ibn Ezra, it was discovered, not invented.
Right. And well, do you hold a view about originally that whether zero would have been discovered or invented?
So as I tended to show, only in ex nihilo idea, I think the idea that there was sometime in nothingness, nothing, and not, but not in mathematics.
Okay. Second question, this transition from the placeholder to the numeral, we understood that there was a hiatus of centuries in the Jewish tradition, so that may not be particularly relevant within your own tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps you'd like to say something about it anyway, this transition from a placeholder to a numeral, when it was finally acknowledged to be a numeral.
So unfortunately, I have nothing to say new about it, because as I said, when it happened in some cultures, the Jews were part of these cultures, but not most of them did not see their involvement in these ideas. Nothing has connection from their side with their with the fact that they are Jews.
But when it does appear later on, and the first Jewish scholars are taking note of zero not as a placeholder as they've been used to, but as a numeral, is there anything in the literature of a shock of recognition or rejection or anything like that?
Not as far as I know. No. It's a very interesting question, but I couldn't find any evidence that people rejected this idea, or just they adopted it, and that's it.
Okay.
It was very useful. It was very much easier for calculation.
Right. It's just that it could have been different. It could have been a shock, in a sense, and somebody might have recorded it, especially since it came later. We're not able to find something similar. For example, when you go back to Brahma,
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
who first defines the operations on zero, he just does so nonchalantly. He just does it, and it doesn't devote much time or attention to it, as though it wasn't anything in particularly of interest.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Where it could have been, if you can imagine.
Of course.
Placeholder, and it becomes a number that somebody might have commented on it. Wow, it's a number.
Yes, it's an amazing idea. But as I said, there are no evidence for this kind of astonishment.
That's important, because we do want to go to the primary sources eventually, even though we may have to filter through the secondary. The final question is, you did speak at some length about the concept of nothingness. Do you think that this concept, or that it was held to be by the people who spoke about it or wrote about it, was it considered trivial, nothingness?
No. Because as I tended to say in my presentation, the Jews, especially in the Middle Ages in Spain, were very aware to the absurd that the notion of nothingness and creation from nothingness was for Greek philosophy. So they had to grapple between the idea of creation ex nihilo and the Parmenidean idea that what is. And so it wasn't trivial at all. And some of Jewish philosophers in the Middle Ages rejected the whole notion of creation ex nihilo. But as I said, they couldn't say it openly, because it turned to be like a dogma that Jewish is the Bible is identified with the notion of ex nihilo creation.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank all of you. Please join us again right after the new year to explore related issues to, if possible, pinpoint zero's epicenter or epicenters, as there may have been independent co-invention. At that time, we will meet Dr. T.S. Ravi Shankar. He's the former director, Archaeological Survey of India in Mysore, on the early inscriptions of zero in South India. And also Dr. Solang Uk on the famous Cambodian zero, the earliest stone inscription in history of the dot zero. Well, until then, happy holidays from Team Zero in Holland, and see you all next year.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
See you. Bye.